Okay, welcome to the third video on the data access object pattern. And well, the first video was about understanding what the pattern is about and a little bit of the theory and the code that I gave you. The second video is about modifying slightly the data source class. This third video is going to be about implementing the pattern, or in other words, creating the class that is going to be my DAO for the customer. So let's get to it. So the first thing that I need to do is I need to create a new class that is going to be the MySQL customer DAO. Perfect. Now we all know that this class is going to implement the interface, means the interface that I gave you, which is a customer DAO. Now once I do that, so of course my Eclipse is going to tell me that I have some methods that I need to implement. In other words, these are abstract methods and I need to write the code that goes inside the methods. So I have three methods. Let's go one by one. The first one is get customers. So this is a method that returns an array list of customers. So that means that it should query the database. It should get all the customers from the database. And once all the customer has been given, have been obtained, I should do some sort of processing because I'm going to get a result set. And from that result set, I'm going to get each one of the rows on the table. And for each one, I'm going to create an instance of the customer class. And those instances are going to be put inside an array list. And that is the array list that I'm going to return. So let's exactly do that. So first of all, if I need to return an array list of customers, so it makes sense that the first thing I do is to create the array list that I'm going to return. So I go and say array list of customer, and I'm going to call this customers is equals to a new array list of customer. And so far the array list is empty, but to complete the structure of my method, I am able to return it straight away. Now, of course, I haven't called the database yet, so this array is empty. So that's what we're going to do next. We're going to call the database. Well, in order to call the database, I need to have the data source class. So I need to have an instance of it. So that's what I'm going to call from the beginning. I'm going to say data source db is equals to a new data source. Perfect. Now I have access to the database because remember, in the constructor of this class, the connection is established. So as soon as the constructor is invoked, the connection gets established. So now I can go and say, okay, db that select. Now that was the method that we created before, and we know that method. Well, we know a couple of things about the methods. The first thing is that it takes an attribute or a parameter, and that parameter is the database query. So I'm just going to show you that code here. The method select that we've wrote in the previous video receives a query. So I need to give a valid MySQL query in here. And the other thing that I know is that it returns a result set. So it doesn't process the data. It is this class the one in charge of processing the data. So, well, let's start with the query. Let's say string query is going to be equals to who? Well, for the method get customers, this method wants to get all of the customers in the customer table. So my query here should be select all from customer. And that is the query that we're going to pass to the method. The other thing is that I know this method is going to return a result set, so I should be able to catch the result set. So result set rs is equals to the result of that method. So far, so good. I'm just going to get rid of that comment. Of course, it is complaining because I need the import. but as soon as I have the import, I should be fine. So the next thing that I need to do is, once I get a result set, I need to be able to process that result set. So I need to, well, you guessed it, very similar to the code that I gave you before, I need to loop over the result set. So I'm just going to say while result set that next. I want to do a couple of things. Straight away, this is complaining. Why? Because when I'm talking about the SQL things, they throw exceptions and they might go wrong. So I should have this inside a try catch. Perfect. So now I have a while loop inside the try catch. And let's take a look at what we need to do. So we need to go over the result set. So for each row, I need to get all the data that I can get. And I know I will get a first column with an ID, a second column with a name, a third column with a phone number, and a fourth column with an address. And that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to create a few variables that are going to hold that data. So I'm going to say int ID. I'm going to initialize that as 0, but that value is not, I'm not going to use it. So a string name is equals to an empty name. Int phone number, which is equals to 0 as well. And finally, string address, which is an empty string. Great. Now that I have the variables, I can use those variables to extract the data from the result set. So I'm going to say result set. Sorry, I'm going to say. I'm going to say ID is going to be equal. So this ID is the one that I have just declared. It's going to be equal to the result set that get integer and the column index is 1. So the first, I know in general we always count from 0, but when we're getting results from the database, we start counting from 1, believe it or not. Well, we're actually counting from 0, which is the name of the row, but that doesn't mean that it's actually the ID. So we're going to start counting in 1 anyhow. So name is going to be rs.get, and you guessed it, instead of getting the integer, I'm going to get a string from the column 2. Now, I need to make sure that I'm calling the right method. So if I'm extracting from the database an integer, I need to get an integer. For if I'm extracting from the database a string, I need to get a string. Let's go to the next one. Phone number is going to be rs.get int, and the column is going to be column 3, sorry. And finally, the address is going to be rs.get string, and that is going to be the column 4. Perfect. Now that I have all the data extracted in separate variables, the next thing I want to do is I want to create an instance of the customer class. So I'm going to create that variable at the top and say customer C. For now, it's going to be equals to null. But once I have all the data, I'm going to make C equals to a new instance of the customer class. And the customer class needs a couple of things. The customer class will need the ID that I already have got, the name, which I already have got, the phone number, which I already have got, and the address. So I have everything that I need for that instance of the customer class. And finally, the last thing I need to do is to add that instance of the customer class into the array. So I'm going to say customers.add, and I'm going to add C in there. Once all of this has happened, then I can return the customers. Okay. Something that I was thinking here real quickly, if something went wrong and by any chance that doesn't happen, or the try catch goes wrong, my array of customer is going to be returned empty. So we should be with safe in this one. Okay. So the second one It's very similar to the first one because if you think about it, I'm doing also a select statement. I'm also doing a select query. But this time, my query is not going to be select all from customer. Instead, it's going to be select all from customer where the ID is equals to the ID that I've been given. So if you're not sure, make sure you test your database query in Workbench. And that's always something that I always recommend just to make sure that you are in the right track. So I have, for example, in here, I'm using Workbench and I'm saying here, select all from customer where ID is equals 20. And I'm going to run that query to make sure that that query is actually working. So it's just a little bit slow, but there it is. So if I put an ID 20, it will give me just one result, which is a meal card and whatever data. Let's put another value there just to make sure that it's working and run the query. So there it is, just getting, now it happens to be getting the same value because I have the same entry several times, but notice that the ID is different. So that means that the query is working correctly. So I'm just going to extract that, to copy that, and that is the query that I'm going to use in the next part of code. So let's put that in here somewhere in the meanwhile. So I'm just going to stick it in there. Now, the full code is very similar to the one we created in the previous code. So let's copy the whole thing and do some changes. So I'm just going to do a full copy and paste and and adjust it for the second method. Now, a couple of things. Do I need the array of customers? I don't, because this method is only going to return one customer. Remember, my ID is unique, so I only will have one customer with the given ID. So I don't need the array of customers, so I can get rid of that. The second thing, the query. Do I want to select all from customer? No, that's the query that we just copied. I want to select all from customer where the ID is equals to something. So that's the one that I'm going to stick in there. Now the third thing that I need to think about. Do I want to hard code the ID 30? No, I don't want to hard code the ID 30. I want to use the ID that is being given from outside. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to break this string into two with my double quotes, put my my plus sign in there just to squeeze in the middle the value of the ID that I have been giving in the parameter of the method. Now let's keep looking at this. Now, do I need to call the select method? Yes, I do. Will the select method give me a result set? Yes, it will. Now, do I need an ID variable? I don't need the ID variable because I already have the ID that I'm looking for. It's been given to me from outside. Okay, the next thing that I need is the name. Do I need the name? Yes, I will need a name. I will need the phone number and the address, and I will need the instance in here. So let's have a look at what else do we need to modify. Now, do I need the while loop? No, I really don't need the while loop because for the given ID, I know I will only have one result. Now, that result the result set that I might get might be empty. So instead of having a while, I'll have an if. So let's take a look at that. So if I have a next value, I will populate some data. So if I have a next value, I will get a name, a phone number, and an address, and with that, I will create an instance of the customer class. But in this case, I don't have the customers array list, so I can get rid of that. But again, this is only happening if I have some sort of result. If I don't have a result, that means that the ID that I'm looking for doesn't exist, so I should return a null object. But if I do have a result, then I need to return the actual customer that I have just found, the actual instance of the object that I just found. And then I can get rid of these return customers because that value doesn't exist. So let's take a look at that code. I'm just going to make it a little bit tidier. There you go. So let's take a look at that. So from outside, I'm getting the ID that I'm looking for. So select all from customer where the ID is equals to the ID that you're giving me. Call the database with a query that I just written, get the result set, get the variables, and if the result set has some sort of data, populate the variables and create the new instance of the customer class and return it. If that is not true, return a null object. So saying that the ID that you're looking for doesn't exist in the database. Okay, so hopefully with this is clear enough. Again, if you have any questions, just let me know in the live session. The last one, the save customer one. So for the save customer, this should be the easier one of all three of them. Now, because this method is getting an instance of the customer class, and that instance is getting everything inside. It's getting an ID, it's getting a number, a name, it's getting a phone number, and it's getting an address. So what do I need in this case? Well, all I need to do in this case is I need to unwrap that data from the customer object. So I know, for example, I'm actually going to get it from here, that the customer object has a name and phone number and an address. Yeah, but in this case, the name is going to come from the customer object. So I'm going to say customer.get name. Same thing is going to happen for the phone number. Customer.get phone number. And in the case of the address, it's the same thing for customer.address. Perfect. Now, you would ask me, Amilcar, the customer object has also an ID. And I say, yes, the customer object has also an ID, but because I'm saving to the database, I'm going to ignore that ID because the database is looking after the ID. The database is auto-generating the ID, so I'm not doing that myself. So I'm just going to leave the ID out of this. Now, in order to save that to the customer, you guessed it, I need the query. I need the database query. So that would be the next step. So I'm going to get here, clan. Now, is the database query is going to be a select statement? No, it's not going to be a select statement. It's going to be an insert statement. And again, I recommend you to go to Workbench and make sure you work your magic beforehand just to make sure it works. So I have an insert statement in here that I have just added here. So inserting to customer, and these three values are going to be the names of the columns, the column name, phone number, and address, and then the values that I want to add in there. So for example, Dermot 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and CCT as an address. So if I run that query, I should get a green light in here saying that the insert was correct, and it actually was. And if I run the query, select all from customer, I should be able to see that entry at the very end of the table. So let's take a look at that. Now I think my magnifier glass is making everything a little bit slower, but there it is. So the last entry that I have just added is Dermot 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and an address CCT. So I know this query works. So because this query works, I'm happy to go ahead. Perfect. So let's stick in here. Perfect. Now, of course, we have a couple of things to modify in here. Do I have to hard code the word Dermot? I don't. I want to use the name that came from the object. So I'm going to break that string with double quotes, plus signs, and undo. I'm going to put their name. So what about the number? Same story. Get rid of that. Break the string with double quotes, my plus sign, and then my variable phone number, and finally the address, same story. Break that down with double quotes, plus sign, and my variable address. Now my query is going to be dynamic and is going to take the values that are coming from the customer object. Well, now that I have the query, the next thing would be I need to call the method from the DB. db.save, and in here, what am I going to pass? I'm going to pass the query. Now, one of the things that we remember from when we wrote that method, the method save, I'm just going to go there for a second. The method save returns a Boolean. If the execution of the query goes correctly, it returns true. If the execution of the query is not correct, then it returns false. So we can use that as my return value in here. So we can do this returning here, and then just get rid of this statement in here. So as you see, the save customer method was the easiest to write because I just need to get the customer object. I need to unwrap the customer object to get the data, and with that populate the SQL query. And once I have the query, I call the corresponding method in the database. If the database returns true, I return true as well. If the database returns false, I return false as well. Perfect. So this is the third video on the implementation, and I would say that this is the most important video of the four of them. The last one is going to be on how we can run this method and some run this program and some consequences of it. So thank you very much, and I'll see you in the next video.